I wasn't expecting a phone call from my son that afternoon. He usually texted. Short updates. Practical stuff. The kind of communication you use when nothing is wrong. So when my phone rang and I saw his name, something in my chest tightened before I even answered.
He didn't sound panicked. That was the part that worried me.
Dad, he said, keeping his voice level. There's a woman here. She's yelling. And she just told someone on the phone that she's calling the police on me. I asked where he was. At the park, he said. The one near the old community center. I'm just sitting on the bench. I haven't said anything to her. That park mattered. It sat in a strange overlap of jurisdictions, technically public, but bordered by private developments that loved to pretend otherwise. Over the years, I'd seen enough complaints come out of that area to know exactly what kind of person this woman probably was. Still, I didn't jump to conclusions. What's she saying? I asked. He paused for a moment. That I'm suspicious. That I don't belong here. That I'm making people uncomfortable. My grip tightened on the phone.
My son was 17.
Clean-cut. Polite. The kind of kid teachers trusted with keys. He wasn't loud. He wasn't confrontational. He was sitting on a public bench, waiting for a friend. And someone had decided that was unacceptable. Stay calm, I told him. Don't engage. If the police show up, answer their questions honestly and respectfully. I'm on my way. I didn't speed. That surprises people when they hear the story later. They expect anger, sirens, tires screeching. But anger clouds judgment. And judgment mattered more than speed. As I drove, I thought about how often situations like this start small. A glance. An assumption. A person deciding they have authority they don't actually possess, but feel entitled to exercise anyway. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I could see her from a distance. She was exactly who I expected. Mid-40s. Sunglasses pushed up on her head. Phone pressed tightly to her ear. Pacing.
Pointing.
Every movement loud, even without sound. My son sat several yards away, hands folded, posture relaxed, staring straight ahead like he was trying to become invisible. I parked and stayed in the car for a moment, not because I was afraid, because I wanted to see how she behaved when she thought no one important was watching. She walked closer to him. Not too close, just enough to invade space without technically crossing a line. Her voice rose. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I'd heard that tone before. The tone of someone performing authority. The tone of someone who expects backup. I stepped out of the car and started walking toward them, calmly, deliberately. My shoes sounded loud against the pavement. She noticed me almost immediately and glanced over, then dismissed me just as quickly. That told me something. She didn't think I mattered.
Good.
She kept talking into the phone, nodding, shaking her head dramatically, pointing at my son again. Yes, she said loudly, making sure everyone around could hear. He's still here. Yes, I feel threatened. Threatened? By a teenager sitting on a bench. I stopped a few feet from my son and met his eyes. He looked relieved, but still composed. I gave him a small nod, the kind that says, "You did everything right." Then I turned to her. She finally looked at me directly, eyes narrowing slightly. "This doesn't concern you," she said, covering the phone's receiver with her hand. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I just waited. Because in a few minutes, the police would arrive. And that's when everything was about to change. The police didn't arrive immediately. That gave her time. Time to narrate the situation the way she wanted it recorded. Time to turn discomfort into danger and inconvenience into threat. I watched her pace as she spoke, voice rising and falling like she was reciting lines she'd practiced before. "Yes, he's still here," she said again, glancing at my son. "No, I don't know why he's here. He won't explain himself." That wasn't true. She hadn't asked him a single question. She just assumed explanation was something she was owed. I stayed silent, standing beside my son. I could feel the tension in his shoulders, but his posture didn't change. He didn't look at her. He didn't react. That frustrated her. People like her feed on reaction. Silence makes them escalate. She ended the call and folded her arms, shifting her weight like someone waiting for a curtain to rise. Then she looked at me again. "Are you his father?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Then you should know better," she replied. "This area has had problems." I let the words hang there. "Problems with what?" I asked. She hesitated, just long enough to tell on herself. "With people who don't live here," she said finally. There it was. Not a crime. Not a behavior. Just existence, without permission. "This is a public park," I said evenly. She scoffed. "It's for residents." "Residents of what?" I asked. She waved a hand toward the surrounding buildings. "This community." "That's not how public property works," I said. Her jaw tightened. "I've already called the police," she said. "They'll sort it out." The phrase was meant to intimidate, to imply alignment, authority by proxy. I nodded. "That's fine." That response caught her off guard. Most people argue, at that point. Beg. Apologize. Explain. I did none of that. We waited. A few passers-by slowed as they walked past, sensing tension. One woman glanced at my son, then at me, then at her. She frowned slightly, then kept walking. The Karen noticed. She straightened her back and raised her voice again, making sure the narrative stayed loud. "He's been sitting there for over 20 minutes, she said, as if duration itself were a crime. "Just watching." My son finally spoke. "I'm waiting for a friend," he said calmly. "I'm allowed to be here." She spun toward him. "I wasn't talking to you." I stepped half a pace forward. "He answered your question," I said. She stared at me, clearly deciding whether I was worth engaging. "You're being very aggressive," she said. I almost smiled. Aggression, apparently, was standing still and speaking quietly. Before I could respond, sirens sounded in the distance. Her expression changed instantly. Relief. Validation. She looked at me with a thin smile.
"Good.
They can deal with this." The patrol car pulled into the lot moments later. Then another. 2 officers stepped out.
Calm.
Professional. Neutral. They approached us together. The woman moved first, stepping toward them with purpose, voice already rising. "Thank God you're here," she said. "I don't feel safe." One officer held up a hand gently. "Ma'am, we'll talk to everyone." She nodded, but her eyes flicked toward my son again. The officers asked her to explain what happened. She launched into it immediately. He'd been lurking. He'd been staring. He'd made her uncomfortable. She didn't recognize him. He wouldn't leave when asked. Each statement drifted just close enough to the truth to sound believable, and just far enough to be misleading. I watched the officers' faces as they listened. No reactions. No judgment. Then one of them turned toward my son. "Can you tell us your side?" My son looked at me for half a second. I nodded. And that's when the balance of the situation quietly began to shift, even though she didn't realize it yet. My son spoke clearly. No rushing. No defensiveness. Just facts. "I was sitting on the bench waiting for a friend," he said. "I didn't speak to her until she started yelling at me. I haven't left because this is a public park, and I haven't broken any rules." One of the officers nodded slightly as he listened, pen moving across his notepad. The other officer glanced between the two of them, my son and the woman, not comparing stories, but behaviors. Who was agitated? Who was steady? That distinction matters more than people realize. "Did you threaten her?" the officer asked. "No, sir." "Did you follow her?"
No.
"Did you refuse a lawful order to leave?"
No.
Each answer landed cleanly. The officer turned to the woman. "Ma'am," he said, "did he do any of those things?" She hesitated. Not long enough to be obvious. Just long enough to be revealing. "He was staring," she said finally. "And he wouldn't leave when I told him to." "This is a public park," the officer replied. "He's allowed to be here." Her face tightened. "But he doesn't belong here." The officer paused. "Belong how?" he asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Whatever answer she wanted to give clearly didn't sound good out loud. "He made me uncomfortable," she said instead. The officer nodded slowly. "Feeling uncomfortable isn't a crime." That's when she turned toward me again. "This is exactly why I called," she said sharply. "Because people like this think they can do whatever they want." I didn't correct her phrasing. I didn't interrupt. I just let her keep talking. Because the more she spoke, the clearer it became that she wasn't describing behavior. She was describing ownership. Her tone carried an assumption that the space itself answered to her. The officers exchanged a glance. One of them asked me a question. "Sir, are you his father?" "Yes." "Do you have any identification?" I handed it over without comment. The officer looked at the card, then looked at me again. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A subtle recalibration. A professional recognition. He handed it back.
"Thank you," he said.
Then he asked the woman for her identification. She seemed pleased to comply. Dug through her bag quickly, confidently, like this was the moment everything would swing her way. She passed it over with a tight smile. While the officers reviewed it, she crossed her arms and looked at my son like she'd already won. "I just want him gone," she said. "That's all." One officer looked up. "Ma'am, we can't remove someone from a public park without cause." She scoffed. "So, you're just going to let him stay?" "Yes," the officer said calmly. "Unless there's evidence of a crime." Her voice rose. "So, I can't even feel safe in my own neighborhood anymore?" The officer remained steady. "This isn't a private neighborhood park." She shook her head, clearly struggling with the idea that reality wasn't aligning with her expectations. "That's ridiculous," she muttered. Then she said something that changed the tone completely. "I want to file a report," she said. "I want this documented." The officer nodded. "That's your right." As he turned back to his notepad, the other officer asked one final question, casually, almost as an afterthought. "Sir," he said to me, "what do you do for work?" The woman smirked slightly. She thought she already knew the answer. I met the officer's eyes and answered honestly. And in that moment, the entire direction of the encounter quietly, irrevocably shifted. I didn't raise my voice when I answered. "I work for the department," I said. That was it. No title. No explanation. No flex. Just enough truth to land without theatrics. The officer didn't react immediately. He simply nodded once, the way professionals do when they hear something that needs follow-up, not commentary. "Which department?" he asked. I told him. That was when the pause stretched just a second longer than before. Not surprise. Recognition. The kind that doesn't belong to ego, but to hierarchy. He glanced at my identification again, this time more carefully. Then he turned slightly, angling his body away from the woman as if she were no longer the focus of the situation. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice just a notch, "are you currently active?" "Yes," I replied. The second officer stopped writing. The woman noticed. She leaned forward, eyes flicking between them. "What's going on?" she asked. "Why are you whispering?" No one answered her. The first officer spoke into his radio quietly, using language that sounded casual to anyone unfamiliar with it, but wasn't. Names were exchanged. Units referenced. A confirmation request made without urgency, because urgency wasn't necessary. This wasn't a standoff. It was a clarification. The radio chirped back a few moments later. The officer listened, nodded once, and clicked it off. Then he turned fully toward me. "Yes, sir," he said. Respectful. Neutral. But unmistakable. The balance of the scene shifted so cleanly, it was almost silent. The woman's face tightened. "Sir?" she repeated sharply. "Why are you calling him sir?" The officer didn't look at her when he answered. "Because that's appropriate," he said. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked from him to me, then back to the other officer, clearly trying to recalibrate a situation she thought she controlled. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I called you because I felt threatened." The second officer finally spoke again. "Ma'am," he said, "no one here has threatened you." "Yes, he has," she snapped, pointing at my son. "He's been intimidating since I got here." My son didn't move.
Didn't speak. Didn't need to.
The first officer addressed her directly now, tone firm but measured. "You've made a complaint," he said. We investigated it. There's no evidence of criminal behavior. This individual has the right to be here. She crossed her arms. So that's it? You're just taking a side. We're not taking sides, the officer replied. We're enforcing the law. She laughed, sharp, disbelieving. Because he's one of you? The officer's response was immediate. No, he said. Because he outranks me. The word landed like a dropped plate. Her face drained of color. What? She said. I didn't correct the phrasing. I didn't need to. Rank isn't just about stripes or titles. It's about jurisdiction, authority, and oversight, and she had just discovered she'd involved someone whose job included reviewing situations exactly like this. This is unbelievable, she said weakly. No, the officer replied. What's unbelievable is calling 911 on a minor sitting in a public park. That was the first time the word minor had been said out loud. The woman stiffened. Ma'am, the second officer added, making false or exaggerated reports can carry consequences. Her confidence collapsed inward. I just wanted him gone, she said. I was scared. The officer shook his head. Being uncomfortable doesn't justify misuse of emergency services. Silence settled over the group. Finally, the officer turned to my son. You're free to stay, he said. You didn't do anything wrong. Then he turned to me. Sir, he added, would you like us to document her conduct? I looked at the woman. She looked smaller now. Not defeated, just exposed. Yes, I said calmly. I think that would be appropriate. And for the first time since this began, she realized the call she made hadn't brought her back up. It had brought accountability. The officers stayed longer than she expected. Long enough to document everything.
Names, times, statements.
The exact words she used when she made the call. The way she described my son. The absence of any actual threat. She stood off to the side while it happened, arms wrapped tightly around herself now, no longer performing authority, just waiting for it to pass. The first officer explained what would happen next. The incident would be logged as a misuse of emergency services. Not a criminal charge, but not nothing either. A record. A warning. Something that wouldn't disappear if this behavior repeated itself. She tried once more to soften the situation. I didn't know, she said quietly. I was just worried. The officer's response was firm but calm. Ma'am, calling 911 is not how you resolve discomfort. She nodded, eyes down. My son sat back on the bench, shoulders finally relaxing. The tension that had been held in his body for nearly an hour released all at once. He hadn't been scared, exactly, just aware that at any moment, the situation could tip in a direction he couldn't control. That's a heavy thing for a teenager to carry. I put a hand on his shoulder. He glanced up at me and managed a small smile. The officers finished their notes and turned to leave. Before they did, one of them looked at my son again. You handled yourself well, he said. You did exactly what you should have done. That mattered. Validation from authority doesn't erase the experience, but it reframes it. It tells you that the rules still exist and that they apply to everyone. The woman didn't say anything else. She walked away as the patrol cars pulled out, not fast, not slow. Just gone. The park returned to normal sounds. Distant traffic. Kids laughing somewhere near the playground. Wind moving through the trees. Ordinary again. My son's friend arrived a few minutes later, confused by the lingering tension in the air. Everything okay? He asked. My son nodded. Yeah, just weird. We didn't stay long after that. As we walked back to the car, my son asked the question I knew was coming. Does that happen a lot? He asked. Yes, I said honestly. More than it should. He was quiet for a moment. She thought she could just decide I didn't belong, he said. That's the problem, I replied. Some people confuse comfort with control. We drove home in silence. Later that night, after he'd gone to his room, I sat and thought about how close the situation had come to going differently, not because the law failed, but because assumptions almost overpowered it. That woman never knew my name before she called.
She didn't know my job,
my role, my authority,
and she shouldn't have needed to.
No one should have to outrank someone to be treated fairly in a public space. The real issue wasn't that I outranked the officers. It was that my son didn't need anyone outranking anyone to justify his existence on a park bench. The next time she sees someone she doesn't recognize, maybe she'll pause. Maybe she'll remember the silence after the radio call. The word minor. The realization that power cuts both ways. And maybe she won't reach for her phone. Because accountability, once felt, has a way of lingering. And that, more than anything else, is how change actually happens.